Between 1964 and 1975, the U.S. became involved in a conflict in the Southeast Asian country of Vietnam. Over 2.5 million Americans served in Vietnam, averaging 22 years in age. They were 4 years younger than the troops in World War II. Myth. Most Vietnam veterans were drafted. Truth. 2/3 of those who served in Vietnam were volunteers. Myth. The war was fought largely by the poor and uneducated. Truth. 79% had a high school education or better. It is rumored that the fighting in the South Pacific was more severe during World War II. This is untrue. During World War II, the average soldier saw 40 days of combat in 4 years. During Vietnam, the average soldier saw 240 days of combat in 1 year. The major contributor to the spike in combat days between the two wars was the helicopter. The helicopter provided unprecedented mobility for our troops. Approximately 12,000 helicopters saw action in Vietnam, and without it, it would have taken 3 times as many men to secure the 800-mile border between Cambodia and Laos. Medevac helicopters flew nearly 500,000 missions and airlifted approximately 900,000 patients, with nearly half of those being Americans. With all the action the helicopter saw, it's no wonder that the unmistakable sound of a Huey triggers memories for those who serve.
I can hear a helicopter well before anybody else can. And I have a hearing problem. But I guess it's embedded in my brain because a helicopter always meant help in one nature or another. Either was coming to get our killed or our wounded, resupply, more men for reinforcement.
I was talking with an Army nurse that had been at China Beach, and she said when she got finished in Vietnam and came home, she was destroyed. And she said, even to this day, anytime she hears that thump, thump, thump of a Huey, she breaks out in a cold sweat. Because she said those choppers never brought us good news.
I still have some dreams. I can remember pulling that body with where the brain fell out of me. Every now and then I'll get some dreams about that or something. I have my moments.
I can understand how it will affect some.
Yeah, you know, it's still back there.
Vietnam veterans are men and women. They were farmers, students, mechanics, steel workers, nurses, and priests when the call came that changed them forever. They had dreams and plans which had to change or wait. Private First Class Leo Curtis Chase, Jr. is unable to be with us. He was the first resident of St. Johns County to be killed in the Vietnam War. Leo was an infantryman in the 7th Cavalry Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division, Air Mobile. In November 1965, he and 300 fellow soldiers lost their lives in the Drang Valley, fighting for their country and their friends. This documentary is dedicated to him. Leo may be unable to tell his story, but others, your neighbors and friends, are willing to share theirs.
The chances were very, very good that I was going to be drafted. I decided, based on the experience of my dad, my uncles, and others, that I'd volunteer for 3 years to serve my country.
I was a very restless young man, and I couldn't wait to leave that town, and I just wanted to see the world.
When I was a sophomore in high school, I'd already developed my career plans at that time. I wanted very deeply to be an Indiana State State Trooper. They informed me that I would not have any trouble being an Indiana State policeman, but they preferred those candidates have the military behind them, and they said that the best Indiana State Troopers are former Marines. Well, that's all I needed to hear, and that's why I went to the Marine Corps.
They were drafting, they had the draft going on, and I didn't have a number at that point, but I thought, you know, geez, if I enlist, you can get a 2-year enlistment rather than a 4-year. So I thought, well, I'll go in for 2 years and then I'll decide if I want 2 more years. So that's what I ended up doing.
I just knew that as soon as I got through school, I talked to the recruiter and I went in the Navy. I paid a little bit of attention to what these guys were doing, these corpsmen were doing, and I thought to myself, looks like those guys got a pretty good job. So when I went back to finish up boot camp and went to classification, the classifiers talking to me about, well, what would you like to do? Where would you like to go, and what do you want to do? And I said, be any possibility of being a hospital corpsman? And I thought the guy was going to come out of his chair and kiss me. He says, oh yes, there's a great opportunity for you to be a hospital corpsman. He says, your scores were great, you'll do well.
I went through, I think it was a first or second gunnery training, so I learned all of the miniguns and rockets and all that. So when I went to Vietnam, first thing I said, I want to fly guns because that's what I came over here for. So anyway, I got into a gun company.
I reported into Vietnam to 5th Special Forces Group headquarters, and I was with about a dozen other guys, and the adjutant was there and briefed us a little bit on going to A camps and various Special Forces assignments, and at the end he said, are any of you interested in volunteering for extremely hazardous duty? And somebody asked a couple of questions about what it was, and they said, well, we really can't tell you until you volunteer. So myself and one of my friends volunteered for it, and we were assigned to SOG, MACV SOG, a Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observation Group. It sounded like a bunch of academians studying, researching old libraries and coming up with data for use by the bigwigs. And in effect, what it was studying and observing the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos and Cambodia. It was classified, highly classified, because at that time, Laos and Cambodia were neutral countries and we were not supposed to be there. And unfortunately, the North Vietnamese were there in huge numbers, and it was decided that it was necessary to conduct a number of activities and operations along the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
When we went to Vietnam, we were all split up. We didn't go as a unit. We all went as replacements to different units. So therefore, the camaraderie that you might have if you were all together going over as a unit, we didn't have that at all.
I remember the very first day that I was in battle. It's a very memorable moment for me. I was a 20-year-old Marine at the time, participating in a full-fledged Marine Corps amphibious assault on a beach just north of Da Nang, Vietnam. The coxswain of this small craft received a radio message, take them on in, hit the beach. All of these little craft line up abreast of each other and move forward toward the beach in unison. At about that moment, there's a sergeant that will give the order to lock and load. And at that moment, you stop puking and adrenaline takes over.
I was only in country about 3 days, 4 days, and they were going to go out on an ambush, a platoon-size ambush, and they'd made me a machine gunner. So I'd never really worked on the M60 machine gun, and they said, you're the machine gunner. And I remember we got up alongside of a barn. It was a kind of strange because it was like a long rectangular barn, and half of us were at one end of the barn, and the other half of us had made the turn and were heading up the length of the barn, and I was about halfway up the length of the barn when I guess a Viet Cong, somebody fired about 2 rounds at us. Well, that we all opened up. I literally held that M60 machine gun like John Wayne, and I was emptying it. Somebody yelled they're in the barn, and I started firing into the barn, and we all fired. And with that, after a few minutes, we realized everybody that we were kind of shooting towards each other, so we stopped. Unfortunately, the next morning after it was all done, we found out we'd killed 11 water buffalo. We didn't have any Viet Cong, but we had 11 dead water buffalo. We set in that night on a hillside afterwards, and I remember just from all that adrenaline and nerves, I remember I got an upset stomach about an hour afterwards, maybe an hour and a half afterwards, because you had so much acid in your system. But that was my initiation.
And the second night I was there, I knew why, because we got mortars in that night. And that was my introduction, that, hey, this is Vietnam, and there really is a war.
When mortars come in, they're quite devastating. And if you're in the near vicinity of a mortar, you're either going to suffer death or loss of some of your body. It's that simple. Many times I would have to help put some of my comrades on a helicopter that were either wounded or killed. I do recall this one Marine. He had received some shrapnel from a mortar fire directly into his abdomen, and his stomach was wide open. When a helicopter comes down to pick up something, I mean, it's quick. And I told him, I said, hold your hand right here, and what he was doing was holding his intestines in. And that's difficult. I don't want to say any more.
The following night, the VC tried to overrun the Seabees compound, and it was my first real experience there, listening to exchange of fire between 50 caliber machine guns and the mortars, and I thought, well, you know, it's a big city and it looks peaceful during the day, but it's somebody else's world at night.
I had a brother-in-law who was with the Armed Forces Radio Network. If anybody's ever seen Good Morning Vietnam.
Good morning, Vietnam. Welcome back to the Dawn Buster on this Saturday morning.
For about 10 days I was there and running around Saigon with my brother-in-law, and then after that I got back to Phu-Bai, and they told me I'd been assigned to a combined action platoon. I didn't even know what a CAP unit was. And the combined action platoons were set up near the villages, and they had these areas where the idea was that you had a small number of American forces working with the villagers to try and more of a pacification program. At the same time, you were stationed where the bridges were, and you had a compound that you'd build out there to kind of give security along Highway 1, which was the main road going north and south within South Vietnam.